This is Destination Unlocked with me, Daniel Edward.
Just about ready to depart.
Please make sure your seatbelt is not fastened and do make yourself comfortable.
Hi, welcome back to Destination Unlocked, the conversational travel podcast featuring genuine locals and true travel experts. And today we're joined by Mary Novakovich, who's going to be unlocking coastal Croatia for us. She is a travel writer covering a variety of places, but the area that I think she is best known for is Croatia, and she's even got personal family ties to the country, which is explored in her book, My Family and Other Enemies, which we'll chat a bit about in this conversation, along with loads of tips for your upcoming trip to Croatia, if it's on the cards. Enjoy. So, Mary, where are you unlocking for us today?
I'm unlocking island hopping in Croatia.
Croatia is a country which, when it comes to Adriatic coastline, if you unwiggled all of the islands and crivets and all of these things, I think it's got a longer coastline than Italy along the Adriatic. It's a wonderful coastline to explore. As we go through the conversation, we're going to dip into a few different places along the way. But I can't help but start with Croatia being quite a strangely shaped country. It's sort of like a boomerang that sort of wraps around Bosnia and Herzegovina, sort of to make sure that they don't get any coastline at all. Croatia is very much about the coast.
Yes, that's right. Or the funny thing, you mentioned Bosnia, and the Herzegovina bit of Bosnia actually has a tiny, tiny bit of coastline in a place called Neum, which is a legacy of many of the previous empires that used to rule the whole region. And it's not the best bit of coastline you could possibly wish for, but that is the only bit.
They've been gifted it. It's
yes,
like
indeed.
Charity, that. Let's start with a moment of history. How did this area sort of come to be in its current form? It is so confusing.
It is confusing, and I'll have to keep this very, very brief. Otherwise, I can spend the next hour talking about the history of Croatia, which is fascinating for those who like history and like Croatia. But there's an awful lot of it. Very briefly, it's had many rulers since it was its own kingdom back in the Middle Ages. It was ruled by Venice for hundreds of years. It was then ruled by the Habsburgs, so it was part of Austria. It was actually the Austrian coast, the Austrian Riviera, and the Austrians were the ones who pretty much developed tourism back in the 19th century all throughout Croatia. When Napoleon was rampaging through Europe, it was also part of the French Empire, briefly, only for about 8 years, and then the Austrians got it back again. It became part of Yugoslavia after the First World War. The Second World War came along and interrupted things. Germany and Italy occupied it. It was annexed by Italy. They were tussling over the islands after the Second World War. And then it was fully Yugoslavia, again, communist Yugoslavia, with Tito in charge, until 1991. When it voted for independence from Yugoslavia. And then the Wars of Independence came, unfortunately, which ended in 1995. So we've had 35 years now of Croatia being its own country, as it hasn't been since something like the 11th century.
It's a turbulent history, but it shows that everybody wanted a piece of Croatia. And over the last 10 to 15 years, I have seen a surge of interest touristically in Croatia. There are certain places in the country which have been calling for people to visit. Dubrovnik is the one that is probably the first on people's mind. I think we're going to end there. Where should we go first along our sort of island hopping jaunt?
Well, if you look at Ireland specifically, which means we exclude Istria, but then Istria is a very popular place. The biggest number of tourists, actually, throughout all of Croatia, is from Germany and Austria and Slovenia, because they can drive there. So that whole northern part of Croatia is full of tourists from the nearby countries. And then you get to the Kvarner Gulf, which is the first set of proper islands. Cres, Lošinj and Rab. And that was very much a combination of the Venetian Empire and also the Habsburgs. And the combination of the architecture is just fantastic, seeing it all just thrown together. They're all very different islands. Rab, for example, tiny island, has about 24 sandy beaches, which is very unusual in Croatia because it's almost all pebbly and rocky beaches. Krk is the biggest island that's joined by a bridge to the mainland, which makes it very easy to visit, and they've got some great wine there as well. And then you need to get the ferry to go to Cres, which is the biggest island. It used to be tied with Krk, and then they had some coastal erosion, so Cres is now the biggest one. And it's very underpopulated. It is more sheep than people. Beautiful place. And then you get the ferry to Cres, and then you cross a bridge, and then you get to Lošinj, which was one of the favourite places amongst the Habsburgs for their summer holidays, because it was just so full of wild herbs. And it's a very soothing, relaxing place. Those are the main islands. And of course, they have a little archipelago off Lošinj as well. A little place called Susak, which is, again, sandy beach, very unusual. And there's bottlenose dolphins off the southern coast of Lošinj. You go further south and you get towards Zadar. And Zadar is one of the most beautiful cities in all of Croatia. That goes back to pre-Roman times. And in fact, if you go to the main square, you've got ancient Roman ruins from the Forum, Byzantine church, which is now a classical concert venue, Renaissance church, 16th century monastery, everything in this one square, which sort of encapsulates Zadar. And then you have the islands, which are very easy to reach from Zadar as well. So a lot of ferries and boat tours go to the Zadar archipelago. One of the loveliest islands, which is a bit far from there, is called Dugi Otok. That's close to Kornati National Park, which is, I don't know how many islands there are now, several dozen islands. There's no permanent population there at all. And it's this incredibly barren, beautiful sprinkling of these strange islands and the Adriatic. The contrast between the brownness of the islands, where you see some olive groves and some sheep on their own and dry stone walls, and then you've got the vividness of the Adriatic, sort of turquoise, blue, green, everything. It's absolutely stunning. And it's very popular for people on boats. Either, they're doing their own sailing, or they're on a skippered boat or a yacht. And it really is an absolutely beautiful, very, very stark, but a stark beauty to it. So that's easy to get to from Zadar. And then we get further south to a coastal city called Šibenik, which is strangely underlooked. I don't know why. It's one of the stops on cruise ships, as is Zadar, but not big ones, because they can't actually get into the channel that is in front of Šibenik. But you have a little series of islands near Šibenik. Two of them I've been to, which are absolutely adorable little places. They both have banned cars. One is called Zlarin and the other one is Prvić. And they are really just laid back little islands where you just go and swim and have some food and just relax and not do much of anything, really. You get the little foot ferry that goes from Šibenik. It's like a few euros to get there. Very easy.
You've mentioned ferries quite a lot, which makes sense given that we're talking about islands. How easy is it as a first-time visitor, or at least somebody who doesn't speak the local language, to sort out these ferries to get here and there? Is it something that you just book online and you turn up, you've got a QR code on your phone, or is it a little bit more old school than that?
Actually, everything you can book online. And if anyone is doing anything vaguely resembling the high season, book ahead, especially if you have a car. Because a lot of the islands, for example, once you arrive, it's hard to get around on public transport. And if you have your own car, then it's easier to explore the islands. Having said that, if you do have a car, then you're limited only to car ferries rather than the catamarans, which are for passengers only. So you have to decide, if you're traveling light and you want a catamaran, then you can maybe get somewhere, get an Uber. You can get Ubers all over Croatia now. And then you can hire an e-bike or hire a scooter or hire a bike once you're there to get around. We've done that a few times where we've hired a scooter, and it's just one of the best ways to get around.
And by scooter, are you talking sort of moped-style scooter?
Yeah, like a 125cc, whatever. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend the electric scooters.
You'd be all over the place.
On those roads, no, you don't want to do that.
So how easy is it to actually get between the different islands?
There are different ways, and generally, it's hard to go from island to island depending on where you are. A very classic example is in central Dalmatia. Split is the second largest city in the country, and it's a ferry hub. It's a very busy place in its own right because it's the second largest city. But if you're doing island hopping, I found, and having done this several times now, that it's actually easier to go back and forth from Split because that's where the ferries start and end. So say, for example, you want to go to the island of Brač, which is the largest in Dalmatia and one of the two closest islands to Split. You really need to go back and forth from Split. And then if you want to go from Brač to Hvar, it gets complicated because you can only go there on a foot ferry, on a catamaran. So best to go back and forth and plan for that. There are two different ferry lines that have passenger catamarans. And then the other, Lidija, is the one that has both catamarans and car ferries. Go online, book it, pay for everything. It's all very straightforward. They have English versions of it. And yes, book well ahead if you're going there in the summer. I would not leave that to chance if you're planning an island hopping holiday.
Are you enjoying this podcast? Give it a review in your app while you continue listening. 5-star ratings get independent podcasts like Destination Unlocked noticed. Thank you for supporting independent podcasts.
I enjoyed Split. I think it's a great place to spend a bit of time anyway. So I like the fact that it's easy to fly in there. You don't have to go to Dubrovnik, for example, and move up. You can just go straight to Split and then stay there, bounce out from there. I've never thought of an island hopping option as being that, with sort of a central base and then almost like an asterisk, you zip out from there. But it makes perfect sense. And if that's where the easiest transportation options are, you're going to make your holiday more relaxed by doing it that way. If you're living at large and you're going out on a privately skippered yacht, and there are quite a few of these available, it's big business out in the Adriatic to rent a private boat, which is crewed for you, so you don't even have to worry about that side of things. Then are you doing it as a one-way down the coastline?
Yes, in fact, I've done a couple of cruise journeys in Croatia where it's a small passenger yacht and you're one of like 38 passengers maximum. And those have become really, really popular, almost a little bit too popular because, for example, I was last year on the island of Korčula and I was in a stack of 10 of these ships beside another stack of 10. And if you're in the 10th ship, you have to walk through 9 other ships to get to your own. Yeah, I know. Now, it is very popular for a very good reason because it's actually a fantastic way of exploring the coastline and the islands. Because you have all sorts of different types of itineraries. You can have ones that begin and end in Dubrovnik, ones that begin in Dubrovnik and end in Split, or vice versa, ones that go up in the northern part of Dalmatia around Zadar, ones that go into the Kvarner Gulf, but the most popular are between Split and Dubrovnik. And the different permutations of journeys, different island combinations. I've done one where it was a hiking cruise. So everywhere that you stopped, you would do a proper hike. You can do whatever you want in the afternoon or the morning and then eat on the island. And that was a brilliant way to explore more than rather than just going to cities. And I've done that too. And also the swim stops. They always find beautiful coves where they anchor and they bring out all the kayaks and paddleboards and foam noodles, and you just swim there, just play in the water. So you haven't got to be on a privately skippered yacht to do that, or you haven't got to be a sailor to do that. You can just join one of these. We have daily swim stops, and that's one of the magical things that you can do.
That sounds lovely, because you're getting away from the mass crowds. I mean, I'm sure you're not going to be the only small ship in a cove. They probably know each other's secrets, but you're still away from the bulk of the tourists that have arrived. You said that Split to Dubrovnik or Dubrovnik to Split tends to be the most common or popular option. Is that because of the ease of access to Split and Dubrovnik, or is that because the journey in between them is particularly special?
Well, probably a bit of both. There are many more popular islands, and you do end up going to the same places. And there's a reason for that, because it has all the infrastructure for the ships, for the tourists, and they're also beautiful places. So people want to go to, the example, the island of Hvar, and people will dock in Hvar Town, which is the most popular place on the island, sort of ignoring the fact that there's a beautiful village called Jelsa on the other side of the coast. Stari Grad, which is the one that all the car ferries go to, beautiful place. People don't really go there much. They all descend on Hvar Town. And Hvar Town is beautiful, but so are other parts of the island. So it's looking at itineraries that don't always do the obvious thing. Another beautiful place that people sort of only see a tiny bit of is the island of Mljet, which has the Mljet National Park on the sort of the northwestern part. It's probably just about a third of the island is a national park. And it's a beautiful place. There's 2 inland lakes, there's wonderful hiking and cycling, and the rest of the island, unless you're actually staying there and you have a car, people never really see. And it is definitely worth exploring. I think sometimes it might be worth looking at an itinerary and then using that as a base for your own.
So to balance it, do a part of a cruise, so that you're getting that highlights package, you're getting access to the swim spots that you might not otherwise find in these little secluded coves and stuff, which just sound idyllic. And then say, I'll take another week with a rental car, or indeed on the scooters, and do it my way.
Every cruise I've done, I've always been talking to other passengers who've topped and tailed it with other parts of Croatia, which makes perfect sense. In fact, I did one, it was a catamaran sailing holiday with the skipper and the crew. Actually, it was the owner of the company and his skipper. It was only 3 nights around the Šibenik Archipelago and Kornati, and that was on a 4-cabin catamaran. And there was another 2 American friends who were there, and that was the last thing they had done in a whole month of being in Croatia. Other people, they'll add 5 days in a beach resort, or they'll add another week exploring inland Croatia. So they'll go to Krka National Park, they'll go to Plitvice Lakes, they'll go to Zagreb. So you can combine that with so many other things. I've always added other days somewhere else because while you're there, why not?
Absolutely. If you're going to make the journey, especially if you're coming from the States, it's a lot further. For us coming from the UK, it's not close, but it's certainly not far. Now, your journey to Croatia, talking of close and far, is quite interesting. What was your connection to the place?
My parents were born there. Well, actually, when my father was born, it was still the kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, which was the precursor to Yugoslavia. My mother was born in Yugoslavia, but actually, as is now, Croatia. And I first went there in 1976. As a child, I was sort of shipped there for the summer. On my own.
On your own?
Yeah, to stay with an aunt and uncle, and I met a whole load of cousins I never knew I had. That was an unforgettable summer for many reasons. One was that I was terribly homesick, and being the youngest and the only girl in the family, I was a bit of a spoilt brat, put it that way. And here I was in a place I didn't know, and it was very alien to me. It was a tiny mountain village in the middle of nowhere. And the closest place that anyone's ever heard of is Plitvice Lakes, and even that was about an hour's drive away. My parents were ethnic Serbs, so I grew up speaking Serbian. And I realized when I got there that my cradle tongue was not adequate anymore. And I was floundering. I was trying to, pick up the language. But at the end of the whole summer, total immersion, which works, I was fluent. I was dreaming in it. I was thinking in the language. I came back speaking English with a Serbian accent. If you want your children to learn a language, throw them in the midst of all this and let them get on with it. And that was obviously well before the days of, Google Translate and things like that. That was a very special time, even though it was really hard work to begin with. And then that made me fall in love with it, with the region called Lika, which is the name of the region that my parents are from. Obviously, the war interrupted things a lot, but I've been constantly visiting now for decades. And each time really finding out more parts of the country that I had known but didn't really know very well. For a small place, there is so much diversity all around the country.
Yeah, even from the very small amounts that I've experienced so far and in my reading about Croatia and Yugoslavia, there's a lot in that region, the Balkans. As an outsider, it's confusing. But as somebody who was an insider-outsider, in that you didn't grow up there, yet your family's culture very much was from there, the reasons that people moved from there wasn't necessarily positive. And now to see the places change over time and now be welcoming again must be a bit of a personal journey.
Yes, absolutely. And also in the pockets of Croatia where they used to have a large Serbian minority, obviously is a tiny number now because in 1995, in the last push of the Croatian War of Independence, a lot of them, more than, I think, 150,000, 200,000 Serbs were expelled. So that presence is much smaller now than it used to be. So it's bittersweet for me because I also love to see my parents' old region try to pick itself up after the war because that was where a lot of the fighting was. And you still see houses that had mortar shells and ruins. But then other parts of Lika, especially towards the west, a place called Otočac, Perušić, the Gatska Valley, it's becoming a place for active holidays and adventure tourism and lots of cycling holidays and hiking and kayaking and fishing. And what's also nice is that people, even though a lot of young Croatians have essentially been emigrating really since the early 90s, and the next generation, they've been emigrating. And so you find a load of Croatians in, Germany, very large number in Dublin. But some of the diaspora, they're coming back and they're taking up old family businesses. Or they are grandchildren of ones who'd emigrated in the early 20th century. I met a young lad just last week whose grandfather had emigrated, and he was able to come back to live he was in his 20s, to live in Korčula, which is one of the most beautiful places to live, so why not? And so all these stories have been coming out. It's good to see that, there's still a long way to go because they have had a lot of population drain over the decades and people are trickling back, which is wonderful to see.
I think a huge part of it is the work that you and other travel writers are doing. Because tourists go, they come back raving about it, and then people with heritage there, suddenly re-see a country which they've inherited certain stories or feelings about. They see it through new eyes. They reconnect with it, and suddenly they realize they want to go to, maybe spiritual home is pushing it too far, but there is a call to the place that is deeper than just the surface beauty of the coastline or the national parks. You wrote a beautiful book that connects with your family story and the country, My Family and Other Enemies.
Yes, well, I have to say, one of the best things I ever did was come up with that title, because My Family and Other Animals is one of my favourite books. And if you come from my parents' region, at some point you will be an enemy, as my parents were. And that was pretty much decades of my travels in Lika, starting with that first unforgettable summer in 1976. Watching it change, hearing the stories of my family. At the same time, one of the chapters was a very long road trip I did with my mother. She was probably in her very early stages of dementia, and it was the most bad-tempered journey I think I'd ever taken in my life. And the two of us never stopped squabbling. We just brought out the worst in each other. But I did manage to get her stories of the Second World War. But she was only 10 when it finished. And I also got stories of other members of my family, other family friends, because it was important to tell these stories. They haven't really been told, especially the Serbian experience in Lika. I don't want to get into too much detail of the 91 war, but pretty much it started in Lika, the first fighting. There were so many aspects of our history that haven't really been explored. And I felt it was a big responsibility for me to try to tell these stories before everyone, they were too old to tell them, or they've since gone. And a lot of people I talked to in my book have since died. So having the sort of the family history and memoir, in addition to a travelogue, in a region that people didn't really know, it was begging to be told. And I was really pleased I was able to do it.
And it deserves that longer format, because a lot of your work is articles which are constrained in their length by the number of pages or indeed the number of columns that you're given. You've got to be so selective about what you're able to put into it. This, you got the gift of space.
I had 70,000 words. I had no format, no template, no subheads. I came up with my own chapters, my own word length, and the liberty, the freedom of writing a book like that was absolutely glorious. I loved it. I'm actually working on book 2 at the moment, and my agent is trying to get a book deal. Keeping fingers crossed we might get something soon. It's another Croatia travelogue, but it's a very, very different type of story.
Oh, well, when that happens, come back and we'll talk about that book. That's very exciting. When you're out there on trips, or indeed just on your longer term travels that may inspire a story down the line, do you keep a notebook in your pocket? Is that your style? What sort of things do you do?
When I'm chatting to somebody and I know instantly they've got a great story, I bring out the voice memos on my iPhone. And funnily enough, the only thing I use AI for, the only thing, is the instant transcript that you get with your voice memos on your iPhone. It's complete gibberish most of the time, but you can get enough out of it before you have to listen to it again to get all the gibberish into proper English. But it's good if you need a couple of really quick quotes when you're on deadline. So I'm voice memos all the time, longhand, tons and tons of photos of everything. Signs, directions, opening hours, all sorts of things. And so I look at my phone library, which is about 13,000 photos at the moment. And I think, that was how to get to such and such place. And, that was to remind me to, that was where that sign was, that was that village was. Even if I'm on holiday, I don't really do holidays. And the very, very, very rare times I've done a holiday, I've actually written about it anyway.
It's funny, every holiday turns into a busman's holiday.
Pretty much so, yes.
For a travel writer. Yeah. You never know when the story's there.
Yeah.
And why on earth would you ignore it if it's there?
Exactly, yeah. I don't think I've actually gone anywhere in the past 20 years and haven't written about it in some way.
Are you one of those people who takes pictures of your meals before you eat them?
I do. And they've come in handy for many reasons. One is if I want to alert people to this fantastic restaurant and wonderful food, but also because I quite often will revisit a restaurant when I'm writing about something, and I need to remind myself what the dish looked like. Because I said, all of this, as Nora Ephron very famously said, everything is copy, and that includes photographs of meals. Because I never know when I might be writing about a particular Croatian dish or a French dish or Italian dish or whatever, and I need to remind myself visually of what it looked like.
What are those Croatian dishes?
Oh, loads of them. If you're on the coast, grilled fish, simply grilled fish is one of the loveliest things. And my favourite side dish to go with that, really basic thing, it's called blitva. Blitva is actually chard, Swiss chard, whatever you want to call it. And it's softened with potatoes and lots of garlic, and it's sort of mushed together. And it's just the taste of the Adriatic for me. And you have that with a plate of grilled mackerel or sea bream or whatever, and that's all you need. And that's such a, olive oil everywhere. obviously. And another really lovely thing I love to eat is burek, which is found all around the Balkans. It's a filo pastry pie. Although if you're in Bosnia, depending on the filling, it's called pita. So that's another story. It's like a spanakopita, but sometimes it's in a coil. Other times it's in like a pizza, like a big round thing cut like a pizza would be. And either with cheese or spinach, or with meat. That's a favourite thing. Although in Croatia they say, well, it's not a Croatian thing because it's a Balkan thing, but I don't care. I have it. I just had a load of it last week.
I think in northern Greece they claim it as well.
Well, yes, and in Turkey, because obviously anywhere where the Ottomans have been, you will have filo pastry, and they've been all over the Balkans. Also, a method of cooking called peka. Peka is the name of the dish. And it's a cast iron pot with like a bell-shaped top. And you put in, one of the loveliest things is when you put octopus or veal or lamb, and then you put all the veg with it. So you put potatoes and carrots and onions and lots of garlic, and that all cooks together on hot embers. And on top of it is stacked with hot embers as well. There's a little ring around the base of the lid to hold all the embers. Cooks there for hours. And the succulence is just incredible. Absolutely beautiful. In fact, one of my loveliest peckers I had recently was on the island of Prvić. It was just so beautiful, so succulent, so just delicious. But you normally you have to book that in advance because it does take hours to cook. You can't just rock up unless you're in a certain really, really big touristy places with a massive turnover, they can generally rustle up a pecker on site, but generally need to book anything for like 3 hours ahead to a day before. In Dalmatia, in the Kvarner Gulf, they're famous for their langoustines called scampi, which are so deliciously sweet. And they have different pasta dishes as well. A lovely one they have in the Dubrovnik region is the špoki macaroni, which is sort of like a long twisted pasta with a slow-cooked beef sauce that's been cooked with carrots and cinnamon, and it's really, really lovely.
Oh, with the cinnamon. Oh, yes, that does sound nice.
I know, it just gives that richness and, really, really lovely. And then if you go to Istria, you have, truffles with everything, but real truffles. So it's not fake truffle oil with that totally, kills everything. It's proper, real truffles, and everything's delicately flavoured with that.
Well, and that connects in with the neighbours in Slovenia as well. They love foraging for truffle and other mushrooms.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yes, foraging. In fact, I was on a truffle hunt in Istria last year where it coincided with the very tail end of wild asparagus season. So you walk along and you then pick the very thin spears, really, really thin, like a pencil lead sort of width, and you just pick that as you go as well. And that's a really big thing in April. Just talk about seasonal things, fish festivals, seafood festivals throughout the summer. Absolutely fantastic. They have all the local fishermen. They set up grills on the waterfront, and you buy a plate of grilled mackerel, grilled sardines, grilled squid, and a cup of the local wine, and there's music playing, and it's one of the loveliest things. When I happen to turn up during a seafood festival, I'm really, really happy.
So you say if you happen to turn up, makes it sound like there's a little bit of luck involved?
Sometimes I did actually turn up purely by luck. We were in Korčula in the fishing village of Lumbarda, and they happened to have a Friday fish fest. And we turned up on the first one of the summer, and it kicked off. I think it was actually the 21st of June. So it was the first day of summer because it was a Friday. And they built a big bonfire on the beach, and people were actually jumping over the bonfire.
Oh my gosh.
I know, it was mad. I don't think they do the bonfire every Friday, but they did it on the first one. And then the town of Bol on the southern coast of Brač, which is close to the most famous beach in Croatia called Zlarin and Rab, the Golden Horn. That's the one that's got the shape of a V, that everyone thinks it's sand. It's not sand, it's pebbles. Anyway, Bol, every Wednesday night in July and August, they have a really big seafood festival on the waterfront, which is just great fun. So Wednesday in Bol, Friday in Lumbarda, and then in September, Lošinj will have its weekend fish festival. September is a really nice time for doing that. It's a bit quieter, a bit more laid back. The islanders reclaim their place for themselves. And that's a nice time to be there as well.
Yeah, by that point they deserve it because they've become so popular over the summer. And they're probably making a good amount of income now from the tourism that they can celebrate a bit when it gets to the end of that peak season. Croatia's not as affordable as it used to be.
No, I'm really sad to see. It didn't help when Croatia joined the Euro a few years ago, and that gave a lot of companies the excuse to hike up the prices. And the government said they were going to clamp down on that, never really did. And then, of course, the cost of living crisis came along and everything has been getting expensive. And the prices have actually gone really, really high. I have to choose very carefully now when I'm eating something. It depends on where you are, obviously. The smaller places, outside of Dubrovnik, for example, you can find much more affordable places to eat. But it is sad. And every summer, newspaper articles saying, oh, what can we do? Well, the prices are so high. We've got to get people to lower them.
To bring us to somewhere which is undeniably one of the most expensive places in the country, but also a place which I don't think can be avoided, or I think should be avoided. I think it's a jewel of Croatia's crown for a reason. That reason might be Game of Thrones, but it's probably something more than that. And it's Dubrovnik.
Absolutely. I've never watched Game of Thrones. I think I might have caught about 2 seconds of it, and I was completely appalled by the violence. And I thought, no, I'm not having this. I'll leave it to people who like that sort of thing. I'm not one of them. But you can't move for Game of Thrones tours all throughout Dubrovnik, and Split as well, because it was filmed there, and a few other places. It's just now full of Game of Thrones fans. And I think it's too much, personally. I really do, because you come off the ferry in Split and they're touting tours to come visit the Game of Thrones castle. You mean Cres Fortress? It's not the Game of Thrones castle. Stop it. So you get to Dubrovnik, obviously, massive amounts of the series was filmed there. The island of Lošinj, which is a beautiful place to visit, and I recommend going there, not just for a couple of hours, spend the whole day there. Have a picnic, have a swim, relax. If you like Game of Thrones, the actual throne is in Lošinj, and have a photo of yourself with the thing sticking out of the throne or whatever. But it's a great, beautiful place, and no one can stay overnight. It's purely just a day trip. But yes, Dubrovnik, it's bonkers, it's busy, although having just been there a couple of weeks ago, I topped and tailed a visit to other places nearby. And even though it's really expensive now, it's 40 euros to walk the walls. It's a lot of money. That has gone up hugely. But it is a wonderful thing to do. It really does give you a perspective on Dubrovnik that you don't get anywhere else. The last time I was walking the walls a couple of weeks ago, it wasn't as insane as it has been before. So they've severely cut back the number of big cruise ships coming into Dubrovnik, and that has made a massive difference. And it's about time that happened, because that's when you just get, even, you still get groups of people, with the tour leader, holding onto a flag or whatever, leading 50 people at the same time. But you just sort of, if you dip in and out of Dubrovnik, you haven't got to stay in the old town. You can stay in Hvar, which is a beautiful place, a beautiful coastal town. Either you can get the bus there, or you can get the boat from Dubrovnik, or the Elefiti Islands, which I visited 2 weeks ago, and I was doing a little mini island hopping tour of the 3 islands that are just literally north of Dubrovnik, and people can use that as a base and get the foot ferry and go to Dubrovnik and come back. Or the big beach resorts on the peninsulas out just north of the old town, Lapad and Babin Kuk, and those you have your own world there. You have the sea, you have a big resort, you've got beaches, and you've got loads of restaurants and things to do around there. And then you can get the bus into Dubrovnik, spend a few hours there, and then come back, or go there in the evening when it's a totally different vibe, because the day trippers are gone.
And that is one of the things that you'd certainly miss if you're going on one of those mega cruises, because they're out by 5 or 6 in the evening, and you just don't get to see the place in the different lights. Everywhere has multiple personalities, and you only get to see one of them if you're there for too short a time. I think there's a lot to be said. I particularly love arriving in a place at night. It's my favourite time to arrive, because you don't see the showy part of it. It's a lot more honest. And if you can put up with it at night, then for sure you'll be able to put up with it the next day once they've put their makeup on.
Absolutely. In fact, even in Hvar Town, which had developed a reputation for a Croatian version of Ibiza, and it did get out of hand. But I'm afraid a lot of young British and Australian visitors were the ones who were drinking too much, passing out in park benches, walking around, wearing next to nothing. In Croatia, you have to remember it's a conservative Catholic country. So don't walk around in a bikini.
I won't, I promise.
Good. Not a good look for you. But they've cut down hugely. They've brought out fines for any sort of public misbehaviour. And they've also cut down massively on the noise levels for all the beach clubs, which has made a big difference. I was in Kvarn last summer, sitting there at 9 o'clock in the main square, and it had a really pleasant buzz, rather than just heaving with barely dressed drunk people. That's gone, which is really, really good, because Hvar is beautiful, and you don't really want to be surrounded by drunken stag and hen parties if you can help it.
I think that's one of the positives of Croatia becoming a little bit more expensive, though, because certainly when Croatia first hit my radar, it was being marketed as the cheapest way to go abroad into good weather with nice beaches, cheap drinks. That was the marketing. And you're going to get a certain type of traveller following that sales pitch.
I tend to disagree, because I've been a lot in the sailing community in Croatia. And if you have a certain amount of money, a lot of people have a certain mindset. So if they want higher quality, whatever that might be, tourists, ones with high incomes, they don't always have the right sort of attitude.
That's like the Bullingdon Club, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I've seen terrible behavior from very, very rich people in Croatia. Money doesn't equal class.
No, for sure.
It's a difficult one, really. I'm an average middle income person. I can't afford to spend 45 euros on a plate of food, just as I couldn't do that in London. So I don't eat out in these places. I also don't want to be put off going to some place where you don't have to spend that much, but you just have to do lots of research and find these places. Why should somebody who loves a place be put off just because I can't afford it? Whereas anybody can just swan in with very deep pockets, demand everything, and usually get it. Do you really want people like that absolutely crawling over Croatia? I don't.
So in terms of etiquette, you mentioned it's a fairly conservative society. What other things should people be aware of to fit in and be respectful of the local culture?
First of all, if you go into a church, please cover your shoulders and take your hat off. I've seen so many girls in, skimpy little tops and, strappy little things and shorts. And so if you're not dressed for it, don't go into a church. You find that in France and in Italy and Spain, other Catholic countries, so just do not do that. Tipping is an interesting thing because a lot of Americans come to Croatia and a lot of Brits, and the American tipping culture has completely invaded so much of Croatia, the bits where all the tourists go. Croatia does not have a tipping culture. The Americans, unfortunately, have now given a lot of Croatian businesses the idea that, okay, tip, yes, we like that. And I was at a beach bar where the code for the Wi-Fi was tip is not included. Yes, I know. So I don't tip because that's not the culture. If you want to round up a bill, if you want to, you do not have to tip. And because I speak the language, just my most recent visit to Dubrovnik, and I've had people, I could see that they actually, when I'm speaking to them in Croatian, and I can see that they've deleted that added tip bit when they give me the card reader, because they will now put it on, and you haven't got to tip. You're buying a drink, you don't have to tip. It is just one of those things where, sorry, Americans, but that part of the culture is just something that is wrecking people's experiences because it's now expected because people like to make money and they've got used to that. And Brits are as bad. I was in one place where a couple, they've been doing yoga every morning in this particular resort, and he insisted on tipping the yoga instructor. And the man was really, it's like, no, honestly, you don't have to give me this money. And he was insistent. They're not being modest. That's just not the done thing.
It changes an economy beyond recognition to expect these weird additional payments. And apologies if you're somebody who doesn't see them as weird additional payments, because that's what you've been told to do. But I am a big believer, if you're going to employ somebody, you should pay them a fair amount for the job that they're doing. And if you're going to accept a job, you should make sure that it pays you the amount you want to be paid before you accept it. And I've seen in certain places 25% tips. That is a quarter of the price added on. Again, I don't get it. I do not get it.
I find it really interesting being in France, going slightly off a tangent, where they include a service charge. Everything has a service charge, and then people still tip on top of that. You don't have to do that. I know they don't even realise that. They're just so used to having to tip. So anyway, Croatia, not a tipping culture,
and that is something that should stay the case.
Absolutely.
The wrap-up, roundup, quick-fire finish is now ready for boarding.
What is your top thing to see or do in Croatia?
Swim. Pebbly beaches are my favourite. Don't like sandy beaches particularly. Sand gets everywhere. Buy a good pair of swimming shoes, or even a cheap pair of swimming shoes. You can get them for like 10 euros in any sort of souvenir shop, and just go into that water. It's too beautiful to ignore. And just swim, snorkel. It doesn't take too long to heat up. I was swimming at the end of May, early June, and it was perfect temperature. A lot of Croatians won't start swimming until St. Anthony's Day in June because it's just the traditional thing, but I forget that. Also, because of the pebbles and the way that the Adriatic flows, it's clean. It's amongst the cleanest seas in Europe. So you don't have the debris that the sand pulls in and out when you've got pebbles everywhere. But you do have sea urchins, so look out for sea urchins.
What is a tourist trap or a common mistake to avoid?
I think the tipping thing that we touched on is a common mistake to avoid. Actually, I do have a tourist trap, and it's going to go against the grain of what a lot of people write about and like. On the island of Vis, an island off the island of Vis called Biševo, is home to the Blue Cave. Now, you've got tours from all over Dalmatia, central Dalmatia, having a day on a boat and you go to the Blue Cave. And then when you get there, you have to pay €24 to sit on one of the official boats that go into this incredibly beautiful cave. You and 5 other boats, 6 at a time, go into this cave. 10 minutes, you're out again for €24. I didn't think it was worth it. I'm glad I did it to see what exactly it was like, because people write about, I've written about the Blue Cave because it's one of those things that you mention in passing, but after having seen it, I could give that one a miss.
What's your favourite time of year to visit?
September, definitely. It's a fantastic time to come because it's still summer. I've also been in October, 3rd week of October, when it was still 25 degrees and the water was still wonderfully warm, low 20s. So for me, that's fine.
What would you say is your top book or film about Croatia?
Strange you should ask that. Obviously, My Family and Other Enemies, subtitle, Life and Travels in Croatia's Hinterland by Mary Novakovich. That one does actually show a lot of sides of Croatia that people don't normally get. But more seriously, it all depends really on if you want non-fiction or fiction. I read a fantastic book by a Croatian writer, and she wrote in English, Lidija, and the book is called Slanting Towards the Sea. It's a novel set around Zadar. It's a great story, beautifully told, really well written, and really does give you some interesting insights into the Croatian mindset.
What is your top food or drink to try in Croatia?
My favourite drink is rakia, which is generic word for brandy. All different types of brandy. You can have fruit brandies, you can have walnut, herbal brandies. That's pretty good. Any one of those will do. You have grappa, their version of grappa. Food, well, I mentioned blitva. I mean, one of the loveliest things is just some grilled fish and blitva.
And final question. If you're heading to Croatia, you want to bring something home, a memento from your time there. You don't particularly want it to be made in China. You want it to be authentic and local. What should you keep an eye out for?
So much of the coast produces olive oil, and they make some very, very good olive oils. And if you can buy a bottle of that, that's definitely worth bringing home.
Mary Novakovich, travel writer and author of the award-winning My Family and Other Enemies, A Life and Travels in Croatia's Hinterland. Thank you so much for unlocking Croatia for us today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Coincidentally, Croatia is next on my travel list, so I'm going to be putting many of those tips into practice pretty soon. Thank you once again to Mary Novakovich. Fantastically insightful conversation there about Croatia's wonderful coastline. I'd love to hear your tips and tricks as well, and if you've visited or visit soon, do get in touch, drop me a message, tell me how your trip goes. If you haven't yet followed Destination Unlocked, maybe this was your first time finding us, do make sure to click follow wherever you're currently listening to this episode. That way you'll be able to easily find us again the next time you want to go armchair travelling somewhere wonderful. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.